I'm Joy. I'm the product technician for cut flowers at Johnny's Selected Seeds. I'm here this morning in our dried flower room. We have been harvesting all season long and the drying room is filling up. And because we've seen a growing interest in cut flowers for dried use over the past few years, we've incorporated drying flowers as part of our evaluation process. So every season, a portion of the harvest is put into this barn, and then we're able to observe it during the season and see what potential different crops and varieties have for dried flower use. All right, so one of the first things I wanted to talk about are some different considerations if you're thinking of drying flowers. And one of the first things to consider is the space that you're going to use. And ideally, if you have an attic or a barn loft or something like that that is dry and with little to no light would be ideal. So we're in the loft of a barn here. We have one small window that lets a little bit of light in, but it keeps it dark enough so that the blooms don't fade. If you dry in a high light environment, the blooms are more likely to fade over time. So we have them in the barn loft. What we've done is we've just put string and some wire across the rafters here, and we've hung a lot of different bunches of a lot of different crops. And what we typically do is, small to medium-sized bunches so that we can allow for good airflow. And another thing that we do to promote airflow is to space out the bunches along the string or the wire that we're hanging. We also think about how much fresh green material we're bringing into the space at a time. And one of the things that we have found is that if we bring a lot of fresh green material in here, the humidity level can rise pretty quickly in the space, and that can lead to mold issues. So we're mindful of bringing, smaller amounts of material in at a time, small bunches. We strip the leaves and off the stems like if we were normally harvesting for cut flowers, just to try to minimize the amount of green material in here. And then there are a lot of different methods for hanging cut flowers for drying, but what we like to do is band the bunch with a rubber band. And we usually try to get it pretty tight because the stems will shrink over time as they dry, and so the band can loosen and sometimes things will fall out, but we try and get it pretty tight. And then what we've found works well is taking like a paper clip and unfolding it, and then sliding one side of the paper clip through the rubber band, and then using this other hooked part to hang the bunch. And then that is a system that we are able to reuse the paper clips every year. The rubber bands usually just last for a season and then they're done. But that's been a pretty simple and straightforward method for us to hang and dry. And I think those are some of the basics to consider if you're planning to start drying flowers. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour of our drying room and show some of our favorites, some tried and true varieties, and then some new additions that we're really excited about. So I'm going to start here. This is Clary Sage. This is going to be a new addition, and you can see just how the blue and the pink, and there's a little bit of white here too, they hold those colors really nicely. It's a beautiful dark blue there. Moving on here, this is a tried and true favorite for dried flowers. This is Crispidia sunball. You can see how nicely these hold that really rich gold color, especially if they're harvested kind of just as they're opening up. This is a great one. Not a lot of foliage to clean from the stems, so it's a really easy one to harvest. Dries beautifully, holds beautifully. Grasses are a really great option for dried flowers. So here's some of our favorite grass varieties. So this is hare's tail grass or bunny tails. This is just an example of a few different types of millet that we have that dry really well. This is green drops, a little bit smaller grains, a little bit of a purple hue on those. This is silvertop wheat. So this is a really nice option for drying. Frosted explosion grass is one of my favorites. Kind of a feathery look on these kind of sparkly grasses. This is quaking grass. This is another new addition, really delicate stems and kind of a shimmery look to this. And then another fun one that's a new add. This is Savannah grass, and When this is fresh, it has more of a, you can use it fresh or dried, but when it's fresh, it has more of a kind of ruby red color to it, and it fades a little bit and darkens, but it darkens to this beautiful like lavender gray color. It's really soft and delicate, but just I think it's going to be a really beautiful wintry color as well, so I'm excited about this one. So this is another really beautiful kind of tried and true cut flower variety. This is Amobium, or Winged Everlasting. What I love about this are these tiny, delicate white flowers. There's multiple flowers on a stem, and so when you're harvesting this, you'll likely end up with flowers at several different stages of opening, but I think that that's one of the things that makes this a really interesting cut flower. You get a few different colors and tones from the center here. So for example, on this one you have some with where the center has turned dark already, but a few blooms that haven't opened at all, and some still with a little bit of gold color. This is a really productive plant, multiple harvests off of this, and a really kind of a workhorse cut flower variety. And then another one with a similarly kind of delicate look, this is Matricaria. So I have a few different examples of Matricaria or feverfew varieties to show, just to see what they look like dried. So this is the Magic Single White, and you can see on this it has a single layer of white petals, but once it's dried, it's the gold center or the disc that really becomes prominent, and really delicate and sweet color. This is Tetra White, so this is a double flowering white, but as it dries, it takes on almost a little bit more of like a buttery oatmeal color and fuller blooms that are really nice and interesting. And then Magic Lime Green is another really great Matricaria variety for fresh, but this is just giving you a chance to see what it looks like once it's dried. Again, kind of takes on more of a caramel or buttery color as it ages. Another really fun one is Hylipterum. This is Perot White. And what I love about this variety is the strong color contrast between the bright white ray petals on the outside and then that gold and black on the disc in the center. This is just so striking, and it really holds its form and shape and color well from fresh in the field to being stored dried. This has been in here for at least a month, maybe two, and you can see just how well the color and the blooms are holding up. A couple of fun ones to also add a little bit more color to dried arrangements are marigolds. So you can see we have 3 different varieties of marigolds hanging here. This is Cocoa Gold. This is Giant Orange, a little bit darker color. And then this is Giant Yellow. So you can see those dry pretty well. Sometimes they have a little bit of a tendency to shatter depending on the stage that they're harvested at, but in general, this is just a really nice full pop of color. Another fun one are sunflowers. These I just harvested last week, so they're still drying down, but this is Soraya, so that's a branching variety, a really productive branching variety, great for cuts in the field. One of the things I like about it is the long, straight, clean stems that are easy to harvest and easy to clean, but then also these really beautiful uniform blooms that dry down to a great size for using in wreaths or dried arrangements in the winter. And so these will continue to dry down a little bit more, but you can see the rich gold color, the dark black disc is a beautiful contrast and a lot of fun. So Gomphrena is another kind of tried and true cut flower variety that's great for drying. One of the things that we're exploring here with this Gomphrena is harvesting and drying methods. So Gomphrena is really productive, but also very time consuming to harvest. And so one of the things we were looking at in the field this year is what it means to harvest and mature an entire plant in one cut and just hang it to dry, and not spend the time in the field stripping and cleaning and bunching stems and kind of saving that work till later in the season after we're out of the field. And so this is just an example of what it looks like to cut an entire Gomphrena plant and hang it to dry. This variety is Kiss Pink. So a really beautiful variety, a really delicate light pink. I love this one. You can see a lot of material here. This took about a minute to harvest, but it's gonna take a lot more work to process later in the season. So still a kind of a question mark what makes the most sense, and it probably depends on everyone's operation. But these are just some examples of whole plants drying, and then as a contrast, this is what it, a little bit more what it would look like if we were harvesting and stripping and cleaning in the field for a really nice, neat, clean bunch that we would hang to dry like this. So definitely this is kind of ready to go and use, but it takes a lot more work and time to get something like this in the field. But either way, Gomphrena is a really great crop for dried flower use. So this is raspberry cream, kiss pink, Audrey purple red, and Audrey white. One of my favorite Celosia varieties for drying is this one. This is flamingo feather. This is a really early, productive, highly uniform Celosia variety, and it forms these beautiful spikes on kind of long, clean, straight stems. If you've grown this variety, you'll probably notice that this color in here is a little bit lighter than what you would see in the field. When you cut it for fresh, it has a little bit more pink to it, but when it dries, it turns to this beautiful kind of silvery white color with just a little bit of pink blush on it, which again, I think makes it really well suited for wintertime arrangements. So I'm going to talk about a few more favorite dried flower varieties that we have hanging on this side of the barn. Up here we have a whole wall of Strawflower. One of my favorite crops for dried flowers, just because of the wide range of colors in this crop. A lot of really beautiful jewel tones, some nice bright colors, everything from kind of a creamy white to a really dark burgundy. And they hold their color really well after harvesting too. One of the things though that is good to keep in mind about Strawflower is the harvest stage. They can be a little bit tricky to tell when to harvest, because the blooms do continue to open after they've been harvested and once they're in the drying room. And so ideally you want to avoid having the blooms kind of blow open and show their center. So you want ideally for drying, you want to end up with something where the center is still kind of hidden, but it can be hard to identify the correct stage in the fields. So Strawflower will remain closed on shady or cloudy days, and so it can be hard to tell what stage of openness the blooms are at unless you're harvesting kind of in full sun. So we harvest in full sun, and then we try and harvest blooms where only the outer petals or the outer kind of bracts are starting to open. It can still be tricky to identify the correct harvest stage, and it's definitely some trial and error with this crop. So if you're growing it or if you're trying it for the first time, don't get discouraged. Just keep playing around with it, and you'll get a good sense of what stage to harvest at, so that you will end up with mostly closed blooms and not too many that reveal the center that are too faded. Another favorite crop for drying is Statice. Statice is another good one that holds its color really well after it's been harvested and dried. So again, another crop with a wide range of colors, from white to really bold yellows to lots of nice blues and purples and pinks and peaches. This is a great one. The plants are really productive. We get multiple harvests off of these per year, and this provides just a lot of the bulk material for dried flower arrangements and things like that. A few other favorites are here. You can see amaranth. This is hot biscuits, red spike. These actually stiffen up a little bit as they're dried and provide some really kind of dark, rich colors and nice textures for dried arrangements. Another one that we're kind of experimenting with this year is Carthamus. And so this is Zanzibar. These are really uniform, productive plants that provide a lot of great foliage for fresh arrangements, but we wanted to see what they looked like dried. And so this is an example of how they look. Really interesting, textural, like kind of geometric appearance. I'm really curious to see how these actually look in arrangements this winter. So just a few more notes about how we handle dried flowers over the course of the season. Here, as the barn fills up, we often run out of hanging space, and so at some point we'll transition to taking material that has dried down really nicely and putting it upright in buckets. And so in general, everything we harvest gets hung to dry, but there are some crops that are sturdier and hold their shape really well once they have been dried, and we find that they can be placed upright and will hold for a long time really nicely just standing upright. So I wanted to talk about a few of those that work well that way. So you can see here we have Nigella pods. These are nice and sturdy and will stand upright. Eryngium is another one that does really well stored upright. Here's Bupleurum. This is a good foliage and kind of a green option for dried arrangements. Carthamus, extremely sturdy and is holding up really well in these buckets. And then Statice is another one where we've started to take some of this from hanging and putting it on the floor for storage. Then I want to talk about a couple of other varieties specifically and how we dry them. Can't talk about dried flowers without mentioning Scabiosa stellata. This is another really kind of classic dried flower. This is a Scabiosa variety, and so when it flowers, it has kind of a pale blue flower, but that shatters pretty quickly and leaves behind this beautiful globe of a pod with a little bit of a dark center in one of each of these little papery cones that are formed around the globe. And so again, really nice clean stems on these. You can get, depending on the crop and the plants, you can get kind of a range of sizes in the globes, and these are really great for winter dried work. They're also small enough to be used in like design work for boutonnieres and things like that. They're a lot of fun and really uniform and productive. And then finally, I wanted to mention one other crop here. This is Rudbeckia, and I mentioned that for pretty much everything that we dry, we hang to dry, and that works really well. The Rudbeckia is I think the one exception so far this season where these were dried just standing upright in the buckets like this. And part of the reason for that is that they have these bright orange and gold ray petals around the disc, and we found that if we dry them hanging upside down, what happens is those ray petals kind of fold forward and you don't get the same sort of rich color that you do if they're dried upright, and the color and the ray petals are allowed to kind of fall open like that. It might make them a little bit harder to work with, but I think that this method of drying allows the color to be shown off a little bit more and is a little bit more interesting. Either way works, but just wanted to share that information as well. A few more varieties that I'm kind of excited about. This one is a new addition this year. This is Russian Statice. The variety is Pink Pokers. And what we really liked about this is the way that it holds its form and its color once it's dried. This is really comparable in color to what we harvested fresh from the field a few months ago. This variety it's got these kind of long, thin, clean stems, and is really, really sturdy once dried. And there's, a little bit of shattering, but not too much. So I'm looking forward to using this more this fall and into the winter. Another new addition for this year is Echinops or globe thistle. This variety is called Ritro. And you can see it has this kind of steely blue color on these globes, a really interesting texture. This is another one that's really fun to use for design work or for boutonnieres or things like that, but also great for any sort of winter dried flower look. The blue is really interesting. The stems are nice and long and straight and clean. This is a thistle, so they can be a little spiky when you're harvesting, so definitely take care at that point. And then as far as harvest stage, Ideally, you want to harvest them before the globes have started to flower. So you can see these two right here are just starting to send out flowers on these thistles. But if you can catch them right before that, that's ideal, and they should hold their color really nicely once they're dried. So we have another new Heliopterum variety to talk about. Here is Perot White, which we've had for a couple of years, and then now we're adding Perot Red, which you can see is a really nice companion to it. It has the same kind of black and gold disc, and then these really nice bright, kind of more reddish pink, especially after it's dried, ray petals around here. So beautiful in the field, fresh, also really nice and holds its color well dried. Long, straight, sturdy, clean stems that are really easy to harvest, and the plants are really productive too. So excited to add this one. This is a little bit later in the season. We've worked through evaluations on a lot of this dried flower material, and we're still working with it and evaluating it. And we also have been adding to our collection all the way through frost here on the farm. So we have one late addition to the drying room to talk about. This is Eucalyptus that I'm standing in front of, and this is a really nice addition for greenery and for a little bit of nice color contrast later in the growing season. We don't usually start harvesting this until August on the farm. The plants are a little slow growing and take a while for the stems to thicken up and become woody, and that's the point that we want to harvest for both fresh and for drying. And so when we do harvest for dried, we do the same thing as with most other things. We hang upside down to dry, and the color can fade a little bit from what it looks like fresh in the field, but it still can retain a really nice range of blues and greens that contrast nicely with a lot of the flowering plants that we're bringing in for dried flowers. I'm standing in front of two varieties that dry down really nicely for us. So this is Silver Dollar right here. You can see that the leaves are a little bit larger, and it has a little bit more of a almost silvery gray hue to it, and that's contrasting with Silver Drop, which is this one right here. The leaves tend to be just a little bit smaller, and it's a little bit more green and less of that blue-gray color. But again, both really nice, productive options for a dried flower room. So one of the things, just as we wrap up our time in the dried flower room, I wanted to mention is that if you are planning to harvest dried flowers, keep in mind, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First, when you're harvesting, make sure that you're choosing material that is good quality and disease-free, kind of keeping in mind, everything you would look for in a fresh cut flower if you're harvesting. We don't, wait until, we don't harvest everything for fresh and then just take in the leftovers for dried flowers. We make sure that we're harvesting at the correct stage and that we're getting good quality blooms, because that translates to a much better dried product later in the season and a longer shelf life for these products as well. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. If you do have questions on specific crops that we've mentioned and the stage of harvest, you can check out our website. We have information on all the varieties that we offer, and you can find information about more harvesting there. So thank you very much.